Bangladesh's opposition BNP wins a landslide general election, returning to power after nearly 2 decades. The victory sets up Tariq Rahman to become Prime Minister as the country emerges from months of unrest and economic disruption. Meanwhile, Bangladesh's Jamaat-e-Islami raises serious questions about the integrity of the election results, a day after rivals claim a decisive win. As official results are still pending, India and Pakistan's prime ministers congratulate BNP leader Tariq Rahman on his victory. 3 brothers, including an 8-year-old, are killed near Ukraine's eastern front line, while a Russian drone strike kills 1 and injures 6 at a Black Sea port near Odessa. Officials say the boy's mother and grandmother are wounded, and energy infrastructure in the Odessa region is badly damaged. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney will attend a vigil in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia, where 9 people were killed in a mass school shooting. The visit comes as the country grieves one of its worst gun attacks in recent years. The United States is sending a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East amid rising tensions with Iran. The move will reinforce the other aircraft carrier already in the region, as President Trump says a deal with Tehran could come within a month. Japan seizes a Chinese fishing boat and arrests its captain after officials say the vessel fled inspection inside to Japan's exclusive economic zone off Nagasaki. The move is likely to further heighten tensions between Tokyo and Beijing. Thailand's Bum Jai Thai party will form a coalition government with Pheu Thai after winning a clear majority in Sunday's general election. Bum Jai Thai secures 193 of 500 seats ahead of the People's Party and Pheu Thai, consolidating its hold on power. North Korea threatens a terrible response if more drones cross the border from the south. Pyongyang issues the warning amid heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula. Those are the headlines. And our top story of this hour: the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has met with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the Munich Security Conference. The meeting comes as both Washington and Beijing prepare for a potential visit by President Donald Trump to China in April. This marks at least the second in-person meeting between Rubio and Wang as the two countries seek to ease tensions on several fronts, including trade disputes, tariffs, and the future of Taiwan. Earlier this month, President Trump held a very positive phone call with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, further indicating a desire for improved relations. Joining us now is Collins Chong Yu Keat, a foreign affairs, security and strategy analyst. He joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Collins, for joining us here on the broadcast. We're all gearing up for that Trump visit to China in April. How significant is this meeting between the two foreign ministers in Munich today? What will they be discussing? What's the top of the agenda? Do we expect really anything to be ironed out before that meeting coming in April between the two leaders of the world's two largest economies?
Well, we have seen this meeting is strategically important for both sides, of course, with the agenda of the visit by President Trump to China in April. This is also one of the platforms to set the agenda, to reduce miscalculations and to ease tensions over trade, over tariffs, over Taiwan. So this is also the meeting for the importance of both sides to keep communications clear and to reduce any miscalculations. Of course, also to set the red lines and to ensure that the other side understands the red lines being set And of course, also both sides would want also to not to have any particular deeper roadblocks ahead, which will be of great importance to both sides in April especially. But this is not a reset in terms of ties. And of course, this is to prepare the ground, align agendas to prevent any surprises during the meeting later on. And it's much of a pre-negotiation signaling. And of course, we've seen how the venue itself in Munich. And of course, China will want to use that to its greater advantage in terms of getting the needed support and messaging efforts to ensure that China is now being seen as a responsible superpower, a responsible global actor in terms of tariff, in terms of economic dependence, in terms of also supply chain resilience, to present itself as the alternative power as opposed to the US. And of course, also the real agenda item is also about Taiwan. And of course, we have seen how US is going to use Rubio is going to use this platform to put pressure on Beijing that and on the issue of Taiwan, also on the issue of Ukraine. The role of Beijing also in reining in Moscow and reining in President Putin. But of course, the larger agenda will be on the tariff, on economic ties, as well as in setting up the agenda for the April visit. Thomas.
Indeed, and we've seen that trade deal that's been announced today. It's been all figured out between the United States and Taiwan. Tariffs cut down to 18%, along with $250 billion worth of investment back into the US economy. How do you think Beijing will be looking at that coming out up until April? We've also seen US lawmakers pressure the Taiwanese government to approve that huge spending package that was approved, that $3.3 billion worth of arms that would be going to Taiwan, which has been highly controversial in Beijing. Do you think that will be brought up?
Well, definitely that will be on the agenda in terms of the overall, issue of Taiwan, and Beijing is expected, especially under Wang Yi, to press further on on not only for Washington but also the greater Western support system with regards to Taiwan, and definitely the arms package, the economic package as well are going to be questioned. But this is not new. This has been ongoing for years, and Beijing is well aware of that. But the timing of this this package, as well as also the timing of this is coming on the back of this landslide victory of Takaichi in Japan. And of course, we've seen how Beijing is increasingly being cornered in terms of having these greater openings in this region, in East Asia. And for these talks, of course, we've seen how China will want to maintain its leverage in the run-up to the talk, to the visit in April, and that it will not want to be seen as being on the weaker side, especially also portraying itself as as growing in terms of its capacity, especially to the European powers. And of course, this is much more on the getting each other to understand on the implications of any potential violations of the red lines being set, and that both sides will not expected to be seen as weak, and both will double down also on the need to on some of the red lines being set by both sides, and the Taiwan equation will certainly be in the picture. Thomas.
And of course, they're meeting at the Munich Security Conference, one of the most significant events when it comes to the national security calendar. We expect world leaders there, important delegations. On that national security front, of course, both sides see one another as a national security threat, while of course keeping those diplomatic ties steady. But of course, there are those underlying issues there. How would you analyse that current situation when it comes to how the United States is going about balancing that relationship along with Beijing?
Well, we've seen how it has turned out quite well for the US and under the President Trump's approach in terms of managing the economic returns from the tariff measures, as well as also at the same time not to be seen as the power that is trying to undermine or contain the rise of China. And President Trump has repeatedly stated that he has enjoyed good relations with President Xi himself. And of course, we have seen how guardrails are being managed, are being created in terms of managing these conflicts and to prevent escalations, to prevent missteps in terms of military incidents, in terms of cyber warfare or AI-enabled escalation, or in terms of tariff or tech tensions. and the temperature of these, economic sanctions or tariff measures are being well managed to ensure that those things do not spill into a crisis spiral. Of course, both sides have been, getting this security dilemma for years now. So this is not something new. And the goal here for both sides is to ensure that it's to manage competition, and of course also to preserve this momentum going forward, especially regards to the visit in April. So this is much more about setting both red lines as well as the feel-good factor for both sides to ensure that they have something meaningful and outcomes out of the visit in April, as well as towards the end of the year during President Xi's visit to Washington. But I don't see any further escalations unless there's this further approaches by both sides, actually by Beijing, in terms of trying to test the waters or test the responses by President Trump. But I don't see that happening, especially within these couple of months. It will make Beijing weaker in terms of the leverage, and will give the pretext to President Trump and to Washington as a whole.
Collins, Chong, Yu Keat, thank you so much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a great pleasure to talk to you as always. We now turn over to our next story and over to Europe's defining crisis. The Kremlin has announced that the next round of US brokered talks aimed at ending the war in Ukraine will take place in Geneva on February the 17th to the 18th. The talks will follow the same format as previous ones, with Russia, the United States and Ukraine participating. Russia's delegation will be headed by Vladimir Medinsky, a Kremlin aide and former culture minister. Medinsky has led earlier rounds of talks in Turkey that yielded little progress. Interestingly, this marks a departure from the previous lineup, which included senior military officials. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, more than 1,100 apartment blocks in Kyiv will remain without heat for the rest of the winter. The damage to the heating plant in eastern Kyiv, caused by Russian airstrikes earlier this week, will take at least 2 months to repair. Kyiv residents have been without electricity, heating and water since early January, after devastating Russian airstrikes. Additionally, authorities have warned of temperatures dropping to -10 degrees Celsius. Joining us to discuss this is Professor Veselin Popovsky. He is a professor at Jindal Global Law School. Thank you so much for joining us here on NewsX World. So, Professor, two big developments there. We have a new round of talks scheduled around 2 weeks after our previous round, which occurred on the 4th and 5th of this month. A venue change and a delegation change, however, is in order for round 3. What's the significance about the talks being moved from Abu Dhabi to Geneva now, and also the Kremlin team, which we are getting reports is also being changed from high-ranking military officials to that of a Kremlin aide? Is that a step forward or a step back?
Well, it's a bit early to say, Thomas. The venue doesn't matter much, in my opinion, but the change in the team is interesting. Yes, probably Medinsky, someone who understands economics. He's basically the person who wanted to bribe, to seduce Donald Trump and his team in the past with some economic deals, with some offers to give concessions for American firms in Siberia and all that. Basically, Russia would like to keep relationship with the United States, and for that matter is happy with any meetings. And Medinsky used to fly to Florida for that matter. Those rounds didn't produce anything, by the way, at that time. Geneva is a neutral place, we know very well. Yes, it's United Nations headquarters. So could be a good news, could be nothing new. We have seen those rounds over and over again over the last 11 months now.
Yeah.
They back in March without any ceasefire. And I think until ceasefire is put on the table firmly and as an ultimatum, there was such ultimatum back last year, I don't know why after Anchorage meeting in Alaska, Donald Trump dropped that strategy to keep asking Russia to accept a ceasefire rather than to go for comprehensive peace deal. And we see no progress since then. So kind of naturally, normally, first should be a ceasefire. As you mentioned, how many apartment blocks, 1,200 are without electricity in Kyiv in the middle of the winter. And it doesn't help to build some trust between the two parties at all. So there should be demand to stop fire, to let civilian people survive the winter in Ukraine as a minimal demand to start with. Otherwise, there is absolutely no hope of those negotiations. They keep meeting and meeting, but the situation doesn't improve.
Do we know anything about any substantial gains that were made during those 2 rounds in Abu Dhabi? We obviously saw a visible prisoner swap, but they happened previously. They were facilitated previously by the likes of the United Arab Emirates, and so that was nothing new.
Nothing new, yes. And that's very normal. There is no need for negotiations to swap prisoners, by the way. It could be done on the level of the military commander there. So again, we see a senior political meetings ending up with simple prisoner swap that could be done even without being in the news. These are so normal in every conflict. Between the worst enemy, there are prisoner swaps. So that shows again and again the level of progress, very minimal, almost nothing. And if we end up with another, well, that's good for the families, obviously, at least some small news. The families will receive those boys back. But apart from that, in terms of ceasefire, in terms of the civilian suffering in Ukraine in the winter, and in terms of thousands of Russian soldiers dying every day on the battlefield, very little progress there, I'm afraid.
We have seen certain events between the last round of peace talks and these upcoming ones. The United States has publicly set a June 2026 deadline for both sides to negotiate an end to the war. So that's pretty significant, along with this assassination attempt, which of course occurred in Moscow about a week back now. Alexeyev, a high-ranking Russian general, was shot several times in the center of the Russian capital. Do you think that any of these situations, these events have caused any disruptions or even push forward negotiations in any way coming into the new round?
Well, the kind of a June 26 deadline is absolutely ridiculous. Remember, Donald Trump promised to end this in 24 hours. After 1 year, he's giving another 5 months extension. So it's not serious. I wonder where does this come from? Why June? And some speculation are that after that, United States will enter into a very active internal political battle for the midterm elections. And somehow the focus will shift from foreign policy to domestic policy in the United States. But again, that's not serious. What does it mean? Ultimatum to end the war by June means nothing. The killing of the senior Russian General Alexeyev in Moscow, again, it's an act of military significance. Ukraine obviously hit military targets. Every Russian general should be hit in the same way, anywhere they were found. This is a war, and every single military object in Russia is to be hit in such circumstances. The aggressor must suffer those hits as much as possible, and there will be as much as possible in the future. And again, they come also to suggest that for Russia, it's, as I mentioned, losing 1,000 soldiers per day in Donbass battlefield, and losing senior generals, and losing plenty of weaponry everywhere, battleships in Crimea and in Black Sea, at some point should bring to realization that this is going nowhere. Russia achieved nothing in the last 4 years almost. Every purpose they put into this special military operation failed. And it continues simply to produce more military targets, but also a lot of civilian suffering in Ukraine. So this must end, and it should end by Vladimir Putin. There is no other way out.
Okay. Professor Popovsky, do stay with us as we turn over to our next story. A related development coming up. Senior Russian officials have challenged the viability of US proposals to build a nuclear power plant in Armenia in a sign of Moscow's concern about the risk of losing a lucrative energy deal in a country it sees as part of its sphere of influence. US Vice President J.D. Vance, on a visit to Armenia this week, signed an agreement that could pave the way for the plant's construction and open what Vance called a new chapter in the deepening partnership between Armenia and the United States. This comes as Armenia is now reviewing proposals from US, Russian, Chinese, French and South Korean companies to construct a new nuclear reactor to replace its sole aging Russian-built nuclear power plant, Metsamor. Meanwhile, Sergei Shoigu, Russia's Secretary of the Security Council, says that Soviet technology has enabled Armenia's existing nuclear plant to withstand a devastating 1988 earthquake. The US plan raises safety concerns. Professor Popovsky joins us once again to discuss this. This nuclear plant, the Metsamor nuclear power plant, built during Soviet era times, it supplies roughly 30 to 40% of the country's electricity. Your thoughts on the Russian, one of the ministers there, security ministers, claiming that it was indeed Soviet-era engineering, that it had saved the nuclear plant from the earthquake, and that a deal with the United States or South Korea or China or anyone else should not indeed be negotiated?
Well, again, Russia has nothing more to say than that. Going back to the Soviet Union, an old reactor, what did they do 45, 50 years ago? Obviously, Russia will lose every single neighbor, even small one like Armenia. Armenians realize how useless is everything that Vladimir Putin can do for them, as well as Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela realized the same, how useless are those Russian troops protecting him in Caracas, and everybody else. Bashar al-Assad realized how useless is the Russian support for his own power in Syria, and everybody else. So sooner or later, every single neighbor of Russia will realize that and will turn to alternatives. There's absolutely no doubt about that. That ambition of Putin to become an emperor and to recreate the Soviet Union turns exactly into the opposite. Sweden and Finland joined NATO after his aggression in Ukraine. So Russia will remain very small, very weak, very powerless and miserable after this absolutely terrible rule of one man, Vladimir Putin, for 26 years. There is no doubt about that. So simple. Armenia shows that very, very clearly. It was a Russian ally until a couple of years ago. That's all gone. And everybody, look at Moldova, look at Georgia, look at the Central Asian republics. Absolutely all neighbors of Russia, apart from Belarus, so far, realize that. But once then even Belarus, under a new president, will detach itself from Moscow, because there is nothing to expect from Moscow, apart from misery, apart from lies and manipulations.
Professor Popovsky, thank you so much for joining us here on the broadcast. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you on these issues. We now move on. Cuba's socio-economic situation is deepening, driven by a long-standing financial and trade embargo, extreme weather conditions, and recent US measures that limit oil shipments. Reports suggest that these challenges are severely affecting basic services like healthcare, food, and clean water. The oil shortage in particular has disrupted services that depend on electricity. As an impact vulnerable group are facing extreme difficulties in the light of this situation, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has called for the removal of these sanctions, emphasizing that policy goals should never justify actions that violate human rights. We move on now. Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich was disqualified by the International Olympic Committee, otherwise known as the IOC, for wearing a helmet that honored fallen Ukrainian athletes during the ongoing war with Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also criticized the IOC's move, stating that athletes should have the freedom to express themselves. Heraskevich called the decision unfair and terrible, expressing his disappointment. Let's listen in to his statement.
I can tell you, like, yesterday was a terrible day. Also, it became terrible not only in time of competition, but also at night, because it was a huge shelling in Kyiv, in my home city, and yeah, I was also very emotional about it. So in my sleep, I received like some some warnings that it's rocket attacks, and it was terrible, and we had victims from these attacks. So I also feel very emotional, and yeah. She can cry, like I respect her feelings, she respects my feelings, so we are equal in that part, and yeah, but at the same time, like I want to remind you this mockery about my my accreditation. It was really weird, and when your Olympic dream is taken away, and then in an act of kindness they give me back my accreditation, it really looks for me as a hypocrisy.
However, an IOC member clarified that it was not the message, but the venue, the Olympics, where such expressions should not be displayed, emphasizing the importance of maintaining neutrality to ensure fairness in international competitions. Let's now listen in to what the IOC president has had to say on the matter.
I don't think it's ever really been a question around his messaging. It was where the message was happening. And, you know, the emotions coming out, he's an athlete. I wanted to see him compete, right? And sadly, we weren't able to get that to happen. And the rules are the rules, and I believe in the rules, and I believe that the rules allow for there to be the safest and fairest way right now that we have to allow for athletes to express themselves, but also to keep athletes safe. And you all know the world that we're living in. Athletes have shared with us they don't want to be put in a position where they can be used for things that they don't agree with, right? And this is why we have these rules in place, is to try to find a balance.
Well, that's all that we have time for this hour.